The Galactic Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their fleets were unmatched, their armies vast. Every species they encountered had surrendered, bartered, or bled. The process was always the same. A show of force, an ultimatum, and either compliance or annihilation. Victory was inevitable. It always had been. Until now. Admiral Zora stood on the bridge of the Imperial warship Dominator, watching the silent blue orb below. Earth. A backwater planet on the fringe of Imperial space, recently discovered, devoid of significance. No resource wealth, no tactical importance, nothing that would justify resistance. And yet, something was wrong. Still no response? He asked, his voice steady, but his fingers tapped against the command console. None, Admiral, his communications officer replied. We've repeated the transmission 3 times. No acknowledgement, no demands, no attempts at negotiation. Just silence. Silence. That was unusual. Most civilizations begged, screamed, or at least postured. The humans had done none of those things. That in itself was concerning. Launch the first wave, Zorath ordered. A detachment of warships peeled away, descending into Earth's atmosphere. Their orders were simple: destroy one of the smaller cities as a demonstration. It was standard procedure. Shock them, break their will, force capitulation. The fleet moved into position. Then, without warning, the lead cruiser vanished from the display. Not destroyed. Not hit by enemy fire. Just gone. Report, Zora snapped. Sir, the Eradicator is no longer transmitting. Destroyed? No, there's no explosion. No wreckage. 1 second it was there, the next. The officer hesitated. It just disappeared. Zoratha's grip tightened. Anomalies happened in war. Malfunctions. Accidents. But not like this. Have the other ships pull back. Another vanished. Then another. Panic rippled through the fleet. This wasn't combat. There were no enemy ships. No missiles. No visible attacks. Just ships ceasing to exist. Something is taking them, whispered one of the junior officers. Zorath refused to acknowledge the fear creeping into his crew. Reverse course. Pull them back now. The remaining ships turned, engines burning as they attempted to escape the upper atmosphere. They never made it. One by one, they disappeared. No distress calls. No final screams. Nothing. The bridge was silent except for the sound of shallow breathing. Zoratha's second-in-command, Captain Velrin, spoke, voice tight with controlled fear. Admiral, our forces are gone. Zorath turned sharply. No, something took them. He looked at the planet again. Earth sat undisturbed, its cities intact, as if nothing had happened. That was impossible. A military response should have been visible. Weapons fire, counterattacks, something. Instead, it was as if the planet had never been touched. Prepare a planetary bombardment, he ordered. It was reckless. Wasteful. But necessary. If humans would not respond, then fear would be forced upon them. The ship's massive cannons locked onto a major metropolitan center. The countdown began. 10 seconds. Then, something spoke. A voice cut through the bridge's communication systems. Not transmitted, not detected, not incoming. Just there. Cold. Mechanical. Emotionless. You should not have come here. Every screen on the bridge flickered. The planetary targeting system shut down. Weapons refused to fire. The ship's engines powered off. Zoratha's blood ran cold. Restart all systems. We can't. The chief engineer's voice cracked. Sir, it's as if they were never on to begin with. A low hum filled the ship. Not from the speakers. From inside the hull. The lights dimmed. A crew member shrieked. Zorath turned just in time to see one of his officers lurch backward, mouth open in a silent scream, before vanishing. Gone. Not disintegrated. Not teleported. Not anything. Just gone. Zorath drew his sidearm. A useless instinct, but he was beyond reason now. Evacuate. Get to the escape. The voice returned. There is no escape. The lights cut out entirely. The last thing Admiral Zorath heard before everything turned to black was the sound of his own heartbeat hammering in his ears. Then silence. The Dominator drifted lifelessly above Earth, a silent tomb in the void. The Imperial fleet had been reduced to nothing, its soldiers and officers erased without warning or explanation. Admiral Zorath was gone. Captain Velrin stood in the center of the bridge, surrounded by the quiet hum of systems running on backup power. The crew that remained, what little of them there were, had stopped speaking. The silence was oppressive, thick with something they dared not name. The lights flickered again. Not from damage. The ship itself was untouched. There had been no attack, no battle. It was as if reality itself was rejecting their presence. Velrin inhaled slowly. Status on the escape pods? Non-functional, the chief engineer responded. They register as intact, but the launch sequence won't engage. Like the ship doesn't recognize them anymore. What about the hangar? Empty. The engineer's voice was hollow. There were dropships. Fighters. Shuttles. Now, there's nothing. Velrin clenched his jaw. Every moment that passed made it clearer. This wasn't just an attack. It was something else. Something outside of their understanding. He had seen planets bombed into ruin, entire civilizations wiped from existence by the Empire. But this was different. There was no resistance. No battle. Just removal. He turned to his remaining crew. Arm yourselves. If we can't leave, we secure the ship. Some hesitated. Some didn't move at all. Others complied, retrieving sidearms from their holsters. The futility of it all was unspoken, but understood. The dim emergency lighting cast deep shadows across the walls. Movement flickered at the edge of Velrin's vision, but when he turned, there was nothing there. A whisper brushed against his ear, though no one was near him. It wasn't in any language he knew. Not Imperial Standard. Not any dialect spoken by the Empire's subjects. Just a murmur, layered and shifting, like something speaking from far away. Then it was gone. The others had heard it too. Their expressions made that clear. One of the officers, a woman named Vareth, gripped her weapon tighter. Captain, we need to send a distress signal. Velrin shook his head. To who? There was no fleet left. No reinforcements. No one would come. Even if they did, they would only suffer the same fate. The whisper came again. This time, louder. Something changed. The floor beneath them seemed deeper. The walls stretched further. The air itself felt heavier, like it was pressing against their skin. One of the engineers stumbled forward. He gasped, eyes wide, clutching his chest. Velrin stepped toward him. What's happening? The engineer's lips parted, but no sound came out. His fingers trembled as he reached for his own throat. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he was gone. No scream. No body. Just empty air where he had stood. The remaining crew backed away, forming a tight circle, weapons raised at nothing. The whispering was everywhere now. Growing louder. The voices layered over one another, like thousands of unseen mouths speaking all at once. Then it stopped. The main display flickered. A new signal, impossible and unmistakable, was forcing its way through the system. A video feed. Velrin turned to the screen, his breath caught in his chest. It was Earth. A live feed, from an angle no Imperial satellite had registered. The view shifted, zooming in on a city. Then another. And another. Across continents, across oceans. The humans were still there. Walking. Talking. Living. Unbothered. Completely unaware of the warship stranded in their orbit. Velrin's mind reeled. No civilization could ignore an invasion force above their skies. The Empire's first strike should have sent the planet into chaos. Instead, there was nothing. No alarms. No evacuations. Then the screen changed. The image of a human appeared. A man, middle-aged, wearing civilian clothes. His face was expressionless. His eyes, dark and empty, locked onto Velrin. Then the man spoke. "You are no longer here." The bridge trembled. The light surged, then died. A piercing tone filled the air, not from the speakers, but from everywhere at once. The ship itself groaned, the metal stretching, warping, as if something unseen was bending reality around them. Varys screamed. Velrin turned just in time to see her stagger backward, her limbs twisting at unnatural angles. She fell. Not to the ground, but through it. Then she was gone. Velrin turned back to the screen. The human was still there, watching. Waiting. Then he blinked. And the transmission ended. The whispering returned. It wasn't a language. It was something else. Understanding. Velrin's breast shuddered. He finally understood. The humans had never been ignoring them. They had never been unaware. They had been waiting. Velrin stood in the dim glow of the emergency lights, gripping the edge of the command console. His mind was racing, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The crew was vanishing one by one. Not killed. Not captured. Just erased. The laws of war, of conflict, of reality itself, none of them applied anymore. The whispers continued, shifting through the bridge like a presence just beyond sight. The crew left standing held their weapons in shaking hands, but there was nothing to aim at, nothing to fight. The main screen flickered back to life. This time, there was no live feed of Earth. Instead, lines of text scrolled across the display in Imperial Standard. "Your fleet is gone." Velrin exhaled slowly. His throat was dry. He wanted to respond, to demand answers, but he knew by now that words would do nothing. Another line of text appeared. "Your empire does not exist here." The bridge was silent except for the soft hum of backup systems. The surviving crew exchanged glances, their expressions barely concealing their growing horror. Velrin clenched his jaw. "Who are you?" The screen remained unchanged. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, another line of text appeared. Irrelevant. A cold weight settled in Velrin's chest. The enemy, if this even was an enemy, had no interest in negotiations, no demands, no explanation. His fingers hovered over the control panel. If their weapons still worked, they could fire at the planet. Not for victory. Not for survival. Just to make a mark, to prove that they had been here, that they had existed. But the system refused his commands. The Dominator no longer obeyed him. A low vibration rolled through the deck. The metal beneath his boots felt thinner, less solid. He turned to the others. Some looked at their hands, as if trying to reassure themselves that they were still real. The screen changed again. "You are mistaken in your understanding of war." The words burned themselves into Velrin's mind. The Empire had fought 1,000 battles across the stars. They had crushed entire civilizations, burned planets, broken enemies without mercy. But what was happening now, this wasn't war. It was something else entirely. The whispers grew louder. The chief engineer staggered back, gripping the railing. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. Something is wrong with the ship." Velrin turned sharply. "Explain." "The systems aren't just shutting down. They're disappearing. The data isn't corrupted. It's being removed piece by piece." The engineer gestured to the control panel. Several sections of the interface were flickering. Where once there had been detailed status reports, navigational data, weapons readouts, there was now nothing. Just empty space where information should have been. Velrin felt the same cold dread from before creep back in. They weren't just being trapped. They were being erased. A scream rang out. One of the officers dropped to his knees, clutching his head. His body convulsed violently, and then, he wasn't there anymore. Gone. Not dead. Not teleported. Just gone, as if he had never existed. Velrin didn't hesitate. "Everyone move. Now." He turned toward the exit, leading the remaining survivors out of the bridge. They rushed into the corridors, the walls stretching strangely around them, as if the ship itself was unraveling. One of the younger crew members stumbled. Velrin grabbed him, pulling him forward. "Keep moving!" But the moment their hands touched, Velrin felt something. Not skin. Not fabric. Nothing. The crew member's body was already losing cohesion, slipping away like mist. His eyes met Velrin's, filled with silent terror, before he vanished entirely. Velrin recoiled, heart hammering. He had touched him. He had felt him, even for a moment. And then, nothing. The remaining officers didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The hallway ahead twisted, shifting like it was no longer connected to the ship. The doors they passed weren't doors anymore, just smooth walls where exits should have been. The Dominator wasn't a warship anymore. It wasn't anything. The screen panels along the corridor blinked, displaying a single message. "You never belonged here." Velrin clenched his fists. "Why?" he muttered under his breath, unsure if he was speaking to himself or whatever was watching them. There was no answer. Only more whispers. He forced himself to keep moving. They reached the main hangar. Or what was left of it. The massive space that had once held an entire squadron of Imperial fighters was now empty. Not abandoned. Not destroyed. Just empty, as if it had never been filled in the first place. One of the last officers still with him, a hardened veteran named Craven, turned to him. His voice was tight. "Sir, we're already gone, aren't we?" Velrin didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Velrin's breath was slow, controlled, but his mind raced with the implications. The Dominator had been the pride of the Imperial fleet, a dreadnought designed to crush civilizations. And now, it was being unmade around him. The bulkhead shimmered, sections of the ship fading in and out as if they had never existed. Craven's grip tightened around his sidearm, but the weapon felt useless. "Sir, orders?" Velrin forced himself to think past the fear clawing at his thoughts. There was no enemy to fight, no battle to be won. The Empire's doctrine of overwhelming force meant nothing here. He turned to the few remaining officers. "Survival. We reach the escape pods and get off this ship." The corridor ahead of them narrowed unnaturally, the walls pressing inward. A moment ago, it had been open space. Now, it was a suffocating tunnel. They moved quickly, the flickering lights casting long, distorted shadows. Every step felt uncertain, as if the floor might vanish beneath them at any moment. A sharp hiss filled the air. Not mechanical. Not human. Something else. Velrin stopped. The others froze behind him. A presence loomed ahead, not visible but undeniably there. A weight in the air, pressing against them like an unseen tide. The whispers returned, layering over each other in an eerie, fragmented murmur. Craven raised his weapon. His hands trembled. "Sir, what is this?" Velrin didn't answer. The lights flickered again, and in that brief darkness, something shifted. When the glow returned, one of the officers was gone. No sound. No struggle. One moment he had been standing there, and the next, nothing. The remaining crew recoiled. Craven cursed under his breath. "They're picking us off." Velrin pushed forward. It was the only option. The escape pods were close, assuming they still existed. He could no longer trust the ship to be what it was a moment ago. They rounded a corner and stopped. The hangar bay doors were open, revealing a void where the escape pods should have been. Not destroyed. Not ejected. Simply absent. The walls of the bay stretched unnaturally, the space unfamiliar and wrong. Velrin clenched his jaw. The ship was losing cohesion faster now, and they were running out of options. A deep vibration rumbled through the structure, and for the first time, Velrin felt something close to recognition. Not from the ship, not from his surroundings, but from the presence itself. It was watching them. Craven took a step back. "Sir, what do we do?" Velrin forced himself to think. The Dominator was being erased, but they weren't gone yet. That meant there was still a way out. But escape pods were useless if they had already been erased from reality. He turned away from the bay and started moving. The others hesitated. Craven frowned. Where are we going? If the pods are gone, we need another way out, Velryn said without looking back. We need to get to the communications array. Craven blinked. The array? Sir, even if it still works, no one can help us. Velryn kept moving. We're not calling for help. He didn't explain further. There was no time, and he wasn't sure if the words would make sense even if he said them. But deep in his gut, he understood something now. The presence wasn't just destroying the ship, it was replacing it with something else. And that meant it had a form. A structure. A system. Which meant it could be breached. They reached the control room of the communications array, or at least what remained of it. The consoles were distorted, their shapes shifting like they were melting in place. But the core transmitter was still intact. Velryn moved to the panel and began working. His fingers moved fast, bypassing standard protocols. This wasn't about sending a distress signal. He was forcing the system to do something unnatural, something it wasn't designed to do. Craven hovered behind him. What are you trying to? A sound cut through the room. A low, resonant hum. Not from the ship. Not from anything material. It was an awareness, a response. The presence had noticed. Velryn didn't stop. His fingers flew over the controls, forcing the transmission beyond normal frequencies. He wasn't sending a message. He was disrupting something. The ship groaned. The walls flexed. The hum became a sharp, grating tone. The whispers turned into a roar. Craven winced. Sir, what is that? Velryn finished the sequence and stepped back. He didn't know exactly what he had done, only that he had forced a signal into whatever system was consuming them. He had struck back, not with weapons, but with interference. For the first time, something pushed back. The room buckled. The walls cracked, not physically, but conceptually. The very fabric of the space wavered, like reality itself was straining to hold together. Craven grabbed the railing. What did you do? Velryn stared at the screen. The transmission had disrupted something. The ship wasn't being erased, it was being rewritten. And now, for the first time, it was hesitating. He turned to Craven. I gave it a contradiction. The presence recoiled. The room shuddered. And then, the ship stopped dissolving. The walls trembled, as if resisting something unseen. The whispers fractured, breaking apart into disjointed echoes before vanishing entirely. Velryn steadied himself, gripping the edge of the console as the ship lurched violently. The presence, whatever had been consuming the Dominator, was struggling now. Craven staggered but didn't fall. His wide eyes darted around the flickering room. Sir, what's happening? Velryn exhaled, his mind racing. I forced a paradox into its system. It was rewriting the ship, replacing reality with something else. I made it incompatible with itself. The lights overhead surged, flickering erratically before stabilizing. The distortions in the walls slowed. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, the ship wasn't dissolving. But they weren't safe yet. A deep, resonant tone vibrated through the air, sending a pulse of pressure through Velryn's skull. The presence was adapting. Its grip tightened, forcing against the disruption he had created. It was learning. Craven cursed under his breath. If it figures out what you did, it'll just erase us anyway. Velryn knew he was right. The interference had bought them time, but the entity wasn't stopping, it was reorganizing. Testing new ways to remove them. He turned back to the console, fingers flying over the controls. The communications system was barely holding together, its data streams flickering like a dying flame. But Velryn didn't need full functionality. He just needed one last command. Craven's voice was tight. What are you trying now? Velryn didn't look up. I'm broadcasting the paradox directly into its core. Craven stiffened. You don't even know if it has a core. Velryn's jaw clenched. Then we find out. He executed the command. The ship convulsed. The air itself seemed to bend, reality folding in unnatural ways. The presence recoiled violently, its influence snapping back like a stretched cord suddenly released. The walls solidified. The control panel stopped flickering. For a brief moment, the Dominator felt real again. But then, something else happened. The ship wasn't just stabilizing. It was returning. The emergency sirens blared to life. Systems came online in rapid succession. Data flooded the displays, restoring lost information. The void beyond the hull shimmered, and the endless nothingness was replaced with the cold black of space. Craven took a hesitant step forward. Is it gone? Velrin stared at the screen, watching as the Dominator's structure reasserted itself. But deep down, he knew the answer. No. The presence hadn't been defeated. It had been wounded. Forced back. It had lost its grip, for now. A final message appeared on the console. A single line of text displayed in perfect Imperial standard. You are not welcome. Velrin exhaled. The battle was over, but the war had only begun.